All right. Well, let's get to today's guest. We have a great guest lined up for you. He have he is the co-author of the New York Times bestseller "Sex at Dawn." He's a featured weekly podcast called Tangentially Speaking, and his work has been featured on MSNBC, Fox, CNN, NPR, the New York Times, the Washington Post. He's here to talk about his new book. It's called Civilized to Death: The Price of Progress. Please welcome to the show for the first time, Christopher Ryan. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Jimmy.
Oh, great. Well, listen, this book, I just started reading it. I'm like two chapters in. I'm 3 books behind. How about that? So you make a lot of first of all, this. So just tell people real briefly about the book, because you talk about hunter gatherers and how civilization has screwed us. So let me just give us a jumping off point. So my show has become successful, and now I've become a comedian who could play theaters, which has been a dream of mine since I started. And I'm on 3 blood pressure medicines. So so maybe that is a good jumping off point for you to talk about your book.
Yeah, it's a good one. I don't know whether to offer condolences or congratulations. Yeah, I mean, essentially what the book is a sort of what I consider to be a much more informed cost-benefit analysis of civilization. We're constantly inundated with propaganda telling us that civilization is the greatest thing that's ever happened, the greatest accomplishment of the human species, et cetera. But I've spent 15 to 20 years studying hunter-gatherers, and a lot of counterintuitive facts jump out at you when you immerse yourself in hunter-gatherer life. For example, we're told that hunter-gatherers were constantly living on the edge of survival, constantly struggling for survival. Hobbes told us in 1651 that life before the state was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. It turns out none of those things are true. Hunter-gatherers work on average 20 hours a week. And I'm talking about hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari Desert and the Australian outback and in some very harsh environments. And what we're calling work, what anthropologists count as work in these studies, are things that we do on vacation, like hunting, fishing, picnicking.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's so funny. So maybe unconsciously we are going back to that's why we feel like rejuvenated, because we're actually going back to our true nature.
Sure. I mean, even a golf club, a golf course, it looks like the environment in which human beings evolved. That's why it's relaxing to the eyes. That's why people like wandering around on those grassy, the hills with the water traps and the sand traps. So that's essentially a recreation of the environmental environment of our species. So really what I'm saying, the book's interesting to me because it's both deeply radical and subversive in that it questions the fundamental narrative of civilization. And yet it's also completely obvious. If you look at the things that make us happy and comfortable and make our lives meaningful and worth living and healthy, these are all things that are congruent with the world in which we evolved, whether we're talking about our friendships, our sexuality, our food, our exercise, you pick it. The approach to health and happiness that most exemplifies the world in which we evolved is the one that's most effective.
So you make the case, first of all, I remember reading an article, and I forgot about it immediately afterwards, but it was about how many people actually have people in their lives. And I remember it went like, you have a really small amount of close friends, and then your family extended, and people you work with, and then people top off right around 130 to 150 people with the amount of people they're able to interact with in their just life. And then in your book, you point out that hunter-gatherers lived in societies of 150 or so, correct?
Yeah, 150 is the max. And that number that you're referring to is Dunbar's number, named after Robin Dunbar, who is the biologist who came up with that number and then tested it out experimentally and found that indeed 150 is the maximum number of people that we can actually interact with in any sort of intimate way. So
Yes,
you might have more than 150 Facebook friends, but you're not actually,
that's right.
paying attention to them.
That's right. So I mean, so what a common phenomena of human existence now in this day and age. Well, first of all, it's amazing that you make the point that we lived a totally different way for hundreds of thousands of years up until 10,000 years ago, and you point the finger at agriculture. That as soon as we started farming, that was the death of us, or that was what really kicked off modern civilization, and then we became slaves to the work. To the work schedule, and that's what we had to hire guards. And there's another book that also made this case. It was called it was a novel. It was called Ishmael. I forget. It won a book award, but I forget who wrote
Yeah.
it. But
Daniel Quinn.
Oh, that's it. Yes. So so I was noticing maybe a parallel with that. So go ahead, explain about how you make the case that agriculture changed everything.
Well, yeah, I mean, and as you say, other people have made that observation, and it's really not contested. Um, Archaeologists, anthropologists, they all agree that agriculture has changed the way humans lived, and that there is a remarkable consistency to the way our ancestors lived from 300,000 years ago, when anatomically modern humans are thought to have evolved. So people who look like us have the same brain capacity as us, the same body shape. You wouldn't know a difference if you saw someone from 300,000 years ago walking down the street. So from the time they evolved until 10,000 years ago, our ancestors lived as immediate return hunter-gatherers, meaning that they ate what they found that day. They didn't have accumulated resources. Once people start to have accumulated resources, then everything changes. And in most situations, that happens with farming. Now, there are some exceptions to this, which anthropologists refer to as complex hunter-gatherers. And those are, for example, societies in the Pacific Northwest where they had massive salmon runs, and they would harvest lots of salmon and smoke them and preserve them and save them through the winter. So even though they weren't farming, they also had accumulated resources. So it's similar to farming, where you have a harvest and you have to develop a hierarchy to decide how that harvest is taken, how it's preserved, who gets what later in the year in between the harvest. So you see societies like that are similar to farming societies in that they quickly have political hierarchies, they have slavery, they have warfare, endemic warfare between the different tribes. This is what happens when you have accumulated resources, radical change in the way people live. And in the case of farmers, archaeologists have determined quite clearly that the health of people dropped precipitously immediately after agriculture.
Yes, I know. Well, did you make the case about how, because I always wondered about how did people live without dentistry? I mean, it's just you get an infection, you'll be dead. And go ahead, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, so many of the things that we're told are great gifts of civilization are in fact sort of partial compensation for problems that are caused by civilization. Dentistry is one of them. In fact, I just put a thing up on my website that I call the Civilized to Death Cocktail Party Cheat Sheet, which lists like the sort of most common responses you'll get from people if you start having this conversation at a cocktail party. And this is one of them. Like, wait a minute, man, I would have died from impacted wisdom teeth if I were a forager. But the thing is, foragers don't have impacted wisdom teeth. They have very few cavities. They have almost no gum disease. The combination of the diet, which is very low in sugar, and a lot of chewing creates different jaw shape. It creates much better dental health. The same can be said of other aspects of health, ranging from depression to anxiety to sexual dysfunction to heart disease. One of the clearest examples is people will say, well, what about vaccines, right? I mean, so many people died from smallpox or cholera or all these other diseases. In fact, almost all the major diseases that we suffer from are a result of civilization.
Because of when we started, they jumped from animals. So when we started to raise animals for feed, then we started to get their diseases. Correct?
That's right. That's exactly the case with the biggest killers. Tuberculosis jumped over from cattle. Chickenpox, smallpox jumped over from chickens and ducks. Influenza jumped over from pigs. So these are all pathogens that our ancestors didn't really have to deal with until they started living with domesticated animals, which of course happened with agriculture. And even if you could even make the argument that malaria and other diseases that don't jump over from domesticated animals are also a result of civilization, because this is the first time when you have people living in population densities that allow these things to spread quickly. Hunter-gatherers live in very dispersed groups, as you said, rarely more than 150 people max. So even if, let's say, a group was afflicted with some contagious disease, it would have spread within the group and then stopped because there was very little contact with other groups. So yeah, I think of it as like, someone lights your house on fire and then shows up half an hour later with a bucket of water and expects you to thank them.
Right. So that's what people don't realize, that a lot of those modern medical marvels wouldn't be necessary if we didn't have this leap forward in civilization. So, and you also make that case very eloquently about how, civilization, we didn't really choose it. It just kind of happened, and you make the metaphor of the guy hanging onto the balloon. And so the whole promise of civilization is that you're going to have a better life, right? It's better. You're not a savage. You have, and so tell me about every time they've taken, native people out. You talk about it in the book, and they try to civilize them. They invariably don't. They always want to go back to their previous life, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's such a difficult conversation to have. It's a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around because we tend to judge quality of life by the things with which we're familiar, right? So someone will say, dude, I don't want to be a hunter-gatherer. I don't know how to hunt. I don't know how to build a fire. I like my iPhone. Like, sure, you like the things you're accustomed to, and you obviously don't know how to do things you weren't raised to do. So intellectually, it's kind of hard to wrap our heads around it. But there are objective measures that we can make that aren't dependent upon where you come from or what your bias is. One of them is, when people see both ways of living, which do they choose? And history is full of examples of people running away to live with the Indians, and has very few examples of Indians choosing to come and live with us. So, for example, in colonial America, there were laws passed prohibiting white people from going to live with the Indians. It was against the law because so many of them were doing it.
To the point where they would actually, if you ran away with the Indians, they would come get you.
They'd come rescue you, in air quotes, and then many of the women and children who were rescued would run away and go back to the Indians the first chance they got. So it was a big problem. And there are many examples that I talk about in the book. One is there were actually three natives from Tierra del Fuego who were on the Beagle with Darwin on his famous voyage, who had been kidnapped a few years earlier, brought to England to see how great civilized life was. And then the idea was they would take them back and put them back where they came from, and they'd tell all their friends how wonderful the civilized people were and that we should just cooperate with them and do what they tell us because they're great. They're so much better. In fact, after a month or two, they went back to visit these Fuegians, and they found that they had abandoned the houses and the gardens and everything and reverted to their original way of life. And when they found one of them, a guy named Jemmy Button, they called him, and got him on the ship, and they were very disappointed, Darwin and Fitzroy, the captain of the ship. And they said to him, like, dude, why did you abandon the house we built for you and the gardens and this whole civilized? And he said, I don't need it. There are plenty fishies, plenty birdies. Like, I've got everything I need, man. Or the guy in the Kalahari who the anthropologist was trying to explain to him why he should learn to farm. And he said, why should I learn to farm when there are so many mongo nuts in the world?
Yeah.
Why work, you know?
So
it makes no sense.
So, well, that's the way. So basically, we've constructed a world, right, where you got to have all this pain to have a little bit of pleasure. You got to work, and that's just the way. So, like our minds. Well, it's the oldest story in the book, right? So, somebody gains wealth and success or fame and all the money in the world, and then they become a drug addict or they kill themselves. And people are like, what? What happened? Well, it's because we've set up this world where we've said, well, these are the things that make you happy. And they're all external, right? They're all external, and it's all, it's either material or monetary or the approval of someone else. And so here we are. This happens. So these people get fame. They find out, oh my God, that is a lie. That actually doesn't. I'm still the exact same person I was. I just have more stuff. And now I don't even have a thing to look forward to get me out of feeling this way. So like when you're poor, you at least have, well, someday I might be rich. So you have that dream. But once you're rich already and you're still miserable, you don't even have that. That's the worst thing in the world. That's when you go to drugs, and that's when you want to kill yourself. So this whole thing, when you've studied hunter-gatherers, they don't have the stresses we have. They don't have, they're not on blood pressure medicines, right? And they're the happiest people on earth, no?
Yeah. I mean, there was a case I cited, a man who lived with the Pinaha people in the upper Amazon. And, how do you measure happiness? It's not a very obvious thing that you can just sort of put a meter on it, right? But he decided he mentioned to an anthropologist friend of his that he had never seen people who spent as much time laughing as they did. And he said I quote him in the book, he says, they laugh when they catch a lot of fish. They laugh when they catch no fish. They laugh when their hut blows over. And if they happen to be in the hut when it blows over in a windstorm, they're laughing harder than anyone. And his point is that the reason they're happy is that the challenges they face, and they do face challenges. I don't want to come across as some sort of Rousseauian, saying the noble savage, is uncorrupted, and yada, yada, yada. But the point is the challenges they face are familiar. They know how to deal with these things because they're the same things that their parents and their grandparents have dealt with. Whereas the things that we're dealing with, the stresses that we face, are unfamiliar. I don't know what to do if I get audited. I don't know what to do if I have to hire a lawyer. I've never hired a lawyer. Where do I find a lawyer? There are different types of lawyers. I mean, there are things that can happen to us that we have no idea. None of us lives in the world we were raised in. It's changing too quickly. So that's one issue, is the familiarity. The other issue is, are we facing acute stresses or chronic stresses? Hunter-gatherers face acute stresses. There's a lion. Watch out. Now it's gone. There's a snake. Don't step on it. We didn't get any food yesterday, so we're going to be hungry tonight, but we'll get food tomorrow. Agriculturalists face chronic stresses, and that's very different. There's a great book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky, where he really gets into this question of chronic versus acute stress. We're evolved to deal with acute stress, quick, intense, and then it's over. We're not evolved to deal with chronic stress, traffic, tax issues. Am I going to be able to pay the rent? How am I going to get my kids through college? How am I going to pay off my college loans? Like all this stuff that just goes on and grinds us down. We're not evolved for that.
Yeah, that was very eye-opening to read that part. Like you talk about how hunter-gatherers, they're completely made or conditioned to live that life, right? Exactly how you pointed out, that all the problems they have, their parents had, and their parents' parents, and for thousands of years. Whereas the world I'm living in is much, much different than the world I was born into. Like there's no, the internet, the cell phone, air travel, the whole deal is crazy. So there's so many, now we're entering into the third industrial revolution. which is going to upend everything. So I want to go over a few more things. Everybody thinks so you make the point that everybody always thinks they're living in the best time ever to be alive. And you're really making the case that, no, we're actually not. We're not happier than we were before agriculture. And in fact, we're not actually even living that much longer because of the way they count how you live, right?
Yeah, that's one of the most pernicious propaganda points. This idea that we've doubled the human lifespan, which I bang my head against a wall every time I hear it. It's untrue. It's something that archaeologists know is untrue, but it's really hard to get that into the public conversation. So the way it works is that when they calculate average life expectancy at birth, they include infant mortality in that. So when you have a lot of babies who die, that brings the average down. And hunter-gatherers do have a lot of infant mortality. It ranges from 30 to 40% of kids who die before the age of 10. And we can talk about, that's a significant issue, and I don't want to gloss over it. But a lot of those kids are kids who would be aborted in the modern world. They're kids who have physical deformities or cognitive deformities or issues that would not allow them to survive. Those abortions are not included when we calculate average life expectancy at birth. So what happens is you have a bunch of kids who die. You have adults. If you make it past 10 or 15, you're likely to live into your 70s or 80s. But the average is 35. And so people hear that and they think people were old at 35. Everyone died at 35. That's nonsense. No human being has ever been old at the age of 35 other than maybe Mark Zuckerberg.
So yeah, you make that the average life cycle is somewhere between 68 and 72, and that we just really what medicine has really done is taught us how to drag out the last couple years of life. You make the analogy of a basketball game. The last 2 minutes take an hour, and that's how we're doing our lives these days. And I think everyone's noticed that too, right? I mean, I don't think that that's a crazy idea, is what I'm saying. I think everyone's lived through that. I think I certainly have with my grandparents and my parents. So,
yeah. And it's interesting that the motivation for making the basketball game last so much longer, the last 2 minutes and the last year or two of life, are both commercial. It's both about making money.
That's right. They have more commercials in a basketball. That's exactly. Oh, that's hilarious. So, I mean, the big problem of human beings is the way we're conditioned, right? So we're mentally conditioned to prepare for a future life, right? So sacrifice now, work, prepare for a future time. But the problem is when that future time gets here, no one trained us how to enjoy that present moment. So if you're not able to enjoy the present moment, making plans for the future are worthless, right? And most people can't live in the present moment. I'm one of them. And so this is the world that human beings have set up. We condition our children from the time they're 3 or 4 years old. Their brain conditioning to get them start looking towards the future. The future is your salvation. You got to do good in kindergarten so you can get into first grade, and you got to do better so you can get to the teacher lectures. Then you got to get into this. Alan Watts tells this great. He tells it like this. And then you got to get into high school. You got to do good so you can get into a good college, and then your master's, and then it starts all over when you get a job. And then by the time you're about 45 years old, what did they say? A midlife crisis is getting to the top of the ladder and finding out your ladder's up against the wrong wall. So, but that seems to be the universal experience that everybody has, that they just feel empty walking around, a cog in a wheel. And your book kind of explains why, because we're living, well, the way you put it is that we've created a zoo for ourselves, right? Because we've created this civilization. We've created an environment for us to live. And it's stressful for us. It's not natural. But you make the case that if we're going to have to live in a zoo, what do you say about it?
Well, I'd rather live in the San Diego Zoo than the Calcutta Zoo.
Right. Okay.
Like there are zoos that are just a bunch of cages with bars, and there are zoos where the people try to replicate the natural environment of the animals that are within it. Paid attention to what are the social groups like that they live in? Are they mixed age, or is it all male or all female? How many people or how many individuals are in a given group? What kind of foods do they eat? How much movement do they have? Do they have trees to climb or not? So yeah, in the San Diego Zoo, I'm not a big fan of zoos in general, but I went to the San Diego Zoo when I was writing Sex at Dawn in order to observe the bonobos, who, as you probably know, which are very sexual animals and very interesting and closely related to humans. And I went there expecting to be angry and saddened, and yeah, they're in an enclosure, but it's pretty big and it really replicates the natural environment in which they evolved, and they looked pretty contented. And so we are going to live in an artificial environment. There are just too many of us. We've destroyed too much of the earth. There's no way we're going to go back to living as hunter-gatherers, but let's create this environment. We design the zoos we live in. Let's design them with a knowledge of what kind of animal we are so that we can make our lives more fulfilling. And what you were saying earlier about this sort of constantly chasing and preparing for the future, that's, if you think about it, maybe the question at the heart of this book is, does civilization work for us, or do we work for civilization?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you wanted to create a mental setting for slaves, you would convince them that today doesn't matter. They're always working for tomorrow. You would also convince them that there's dignity in work, no matter what the work is, no matter how meaningless it is. At least you're working. And if you don't work, you don't deserve to eat. You're nothing. If you aren't working, you're useless. This is the kind of propaganda that creates a slave state, which is what we live in. And so if you can convince people to constantly sacrifice their present happiness, if you convince them that the sources of free pleasure that they don't have to pay for are shameful, like sex, for example, and a lot of drugs that are cheap and give you a lot of pleasure and insight, you'd also convince them that substances that occur naturally in nature, like psychedelic mushrooms, for example, are totally illegal, toxic. You go to prison for longer for having a bag of mushrooms at a Grateful Dead show than if you commit second-degree murder, which is the case in the United States in many places. Why are those substances so illegal, so prohibited? Maybe it's because they offer insight into what a sham this is.
Well, of course that's true. So, I mean, your book is basically looking back at the hunter-gatherer societies, and it's very enlightening. But how will this benefit people living now? And is this going to actually help us move forward?
Well, I think it's a benefit in two ways. One is that it helps, I hope it will help people understand that whatever discontent they're feeling, the sort of depression that you were referencing earlier, the sense of disappointment, like I've done everything I was supposed to do. I've got the big house, I've got the big income, I'm playing the big shows, and I'm still the same guy. It helps explain why that is. And I hope that it takes away some of the self-blame that people have, that people can understand, wait a minute, I'm living in this world that's lying to me about the things that are going to make me happy, the things that really matter. And so it's not really your fault that those things don't fulfill you, just like it's not your fault that a horrible diet that the FDA has been telling you is the proper diet for years gives you heart disease. That's not your fault. You've been eating stuff they told you to eat. It turns out they were giving you the wrong information because corporate interests convinced a bunch of scientists to blame heart disease on fat rather than sugar, which we now know was a whole scam. Similarly, if ambition isn't making you happy, if material success isn't making you happy, it's because you've been fed a bunch of lies about how the human brain works and what is truly meaningful and satisfying for a human being. So I hope that it'll have a two-prong effect. One is people will realize their discontent isn't a result of their own failure, and that just trying harder at doing these same things isn't going to make it better. And on the other side, it offers some guidance on how to think about what truly is meaningful and satisfying in life. And so I go through some sections in the book where we talk about, for example, disaster sociology. These people who have spent, it's an academic discipline where they study how people behave in disasters and when the trappings of civilization fall away and people are left on their own, right? What happens? Do people rape and pillage? No. In fact, what happens is people reach out and help one another. And not just people they're related to in some genetic, evolutionary, inclusive fitness sense. Neighbors help one another. And there's a very moving quote where the man who, I think his name was Charles Fritz, the originator of the discipline, was talking near the end of his life. And he said, a lifetime of studying disasters has convinced me that people who survive disasters look back at those years as the best years of their lives. They had a sense of community, purpose, meaning. They felt important. They were helping other people. The true disaster is daily life. That, yeah,
So
that's what fragments us and keeps us separate. More people live alone right now than ever in the history of our species. Think about that. 25% of Americans live alone. What's the worst punishment we say for the worst criminals? Solitary confinement.
that's right. That's right. And that's what cults do too. When you have a cult, and if you go against the cult, they ostracize you, which is the worst thing. You're separated from the cult, and that's what Mark Zuckerberg does. That's what Jack.
That's why he's so old.
That's what Jack at Twitter does. That's what they do. If you cross them, if you a bad person, you're going to be ostracized from the group. It's the worst thing you can do to someone, and that's again. I'm sure this was predicted by someone named George Orwell or something like that.
Sure.
Now, you asked the question, how effective is this whole progress idea? Do you got any conclusions?
How effective is the idea in
Yeah.
terms of what? In terms of creating happiness or just convincing people to do what you want them to do?
So I'm going to guess you just kind of answered it. So it's been successful in getting people to do what they want. So we do live in this kind of evil web but you've so now how do you deal with it? Like have you checked out?
I have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I spend half my year living in a Sprinter van called Scarlett Johansson. Just drive around. So I've done it 3 summers now. I drive around the Rockies and the Western United States and Canada and do podcasts on the road with random people I meet. And so I sort of spend a lot of my time sitting by a campfire, looking at the stars, jumping in rivers, trying to, sort of live in the present moment. You were talking earlier about this, again, to return to the chasing the future thing. Isn't it ironic that basically every religious tradition encourages people to live in the moment, right? I mean, you think about Buddhism, it's all about be here now, right? It's about forgetting the future, forget the past. You mentioned Alan Watts. He wrote about that all the time. That's where we came from. Everything, as I said earlier, diet, exercise, medicine, meditation, sexuality, all these things are an attempt to return to where we came from because that's our home. And my feeling is that as a species, when I'm feeling optimistic, I think that as a species, we're on this hero's journey. You've probably read Joseph Campbell's work,
Yes.
The Hero of the Thousand Faces,
Right.
where he points out that every society around the world has the same origin myth. It's like the Odyssey, right? Where someone leaves their home, they go out, they have these experiences and challenges, and they meet all these strange characters and face all these risks and near-death experiences. And then they take that knowledge that they've gained through this journey and they return to where they began. And as T.S. Eliot wrote, we shall not cease our explorations, and the end of all our exploring will be to return to where we began and know the place for the first time. So I think that that is what we're doing as a species. I hope that we've been on this journey, and it feels to me now that we're turning toward home.
Really?
On good days.
So, I mean, we're going to get a chance to put that theory to the test about how people act in tragedies, and because climate change is here, and the United States and the West has spent the better part of the last 15 years bombing the shit out of the Middle East. Barack Obama helped create millions upon millions of in fact. There was 65 million refugees in 2015 in the Middle East, caused by all our goddamn bombing. But that's nothing compared to what's coming with climate change, and it's coming faster than people even the worst predictions. It's coming faster than that. So we're going to get a chance to see how well people come together. Any predictions?
As far as climate change,
as far as what's going to for humanity in coming in the next century.
Oh man, I don't claim to have any special knowledge or insight into the future. Publishers want you to, you always have to end a book with like, what now, and what's the takeaway, So I did have to. I agreed to sort of speculate a bit at the end of the book, and basically. I outlined three possibilities. One is that we continue on the road we're on, which is, as I see it, sort of a merging of biology and technology. So, now we've got titanium hips and knees and, implanted contact lenses, and that's going to continue, and we'll be having sex with robots and artificially inseminating and playing with the genes with the CRISPR technology, and will merge with machinery in a way that will that we'll look back, or something will look back and see us as like a larval stage of the species, that this was our purpose, to create technology and then merge with it. That's sort of the Elon Musk vision of the future, I think, where we will need to go to other planets because this one will be so trashed at that point that it won't support life. Another possibility is total collapse, environmental and economic collapse, and some sort of a Mad Max cannibalistic, The Road, Cormac McCarthy's book, dystopian kind of situation. And then the third is, as I said, on a good day, I wake up hoping that our species is going to take the knowledge that we've learned in the last 8 to 10,000 years. And we have learned amazing things, right? We've learned that we can have all the sex we want and not have babies if we don't want to, right? We've learned how to control birth. We've learned that we have enough productive capacity to give everyone in the world the equivalent of $1,000 a month. We know we can do that. We can afford it. If we take that out of the defense budgets of the world, we'll have plenty left over, and no reason to fight if we're spreading the resources around equitably. And by the way, that's a very hunter-gatherer approach to economics and to politics. We haven't even spoken about that, but hunter-gatherers' approach to politics is the inverse of the way we do it. If you want to be a leader in a hunter-gatherer group, and you express that desire, you make yourself ridiculous, and you immediately are disqualified from leadership. So nobody who says, I should be the leader, ever gets to be the leader. In fact, the leader is the person who is probably the humblest and least likely to seek that kind of attention. They're just somebody who tends to make good decisions, and other people notice that, right? So you're sort of drawn into a position of leadership reluctantly. Anyway, so I hope that we could take that knowledge.
Let me just ask you about the hunter-gatherers, because you talk about the way they split up. You're talking about the way they split up their leadership, that it was a shared leadership. right? And power was they well they when you talk about egalitarianism, mobility, gratitude, and they also they big value was sharing. Because I remember you said about where's the best place to store your food in my neighbor's stomach, which
Right.
means because when I need food, he's going to share his with me. And we're all going to take care of each other. So we don't have to build a silo and have a guard guarding it. We're going to take care of each other. And the way hunter gatherers approach power is that you say power is fluid. What do you mean by that?
Well, it comes and goes depending on the situation, right? So someone might be particularly clever about noticing the way animals behave, and that the best place to go to hunt is going to be, over here or over there. They tend to know that stuff just because they're very attuned to that. Whereas someone else might be much better at deciding where to set up the camp because they notice the landscape and the way the winds move. So it depends what you're good at. You would be the leader in that area, right? Someone else might be really good with kids. So, okay, we're having a problem with a kid, go to her, ask her what we should do, right? So the point is there's this constant confusion if you look at contact between Europeans who are hierarchical and hunter-gatherers who are egalitarian, as you said, when they would say, well, take me to your leader, right? Who's the chief here? We want to talk to the chief. There's no chief. We don't know what you're talking about. Most of the people that we think of as chiefs, like Geronimo or Crazy Horse, these famous chiefs, they were war chiefs. They were people who were particularly good at fighting wars, at organizing for a war. But they weren't the overall chief of the society. They didn't decide where to set up the camp or where to hunt or all these different decisions. Those are all made by different people, depending upon whose opinion carries the most weight. So this is the thing that when you're in a group of 150 or fewer people who all know each other, we behave very differently. We're a very different kind of organism than we are when we're in much larger groups where other people become abstractions and we form into these superorganisms, which are institutions or nation states or so on, where we're sort of subsumed into the superorganism the way a termite is into a termite colony, or birds that fly in flocks and nobody really knows how they decide which direction to go, right? But there's some emergent intelligence that controls these things. So I think that's what happens with us, that we're constantly trying to return to the state in which these things happen organically and fluidly, to use your term, rather than institutionally. But it's very difficult at this scale.
So it's interesting to me that hunter gatherers, like you said, that they had their power was situational. Like they didn't have an overall king. They had whoever was good in that situation was the leader in that situation. But we evolved from apes. Aren't they inherently hierarchical, right? Or am I wrong?
Well, okay, by ape, we're talking about the great apes, right? People conflate gorillas and apes. So we're talking about the great apes, of which we are one. There's gorillas, humans, chimps, bonobos, and orangutans. Those are the 5 great apes. And for people who are listening who don't know the difference between apes and monkeys, apes don't have tails. That's the easiest way to differentiate them. And if you look at those 5 great apes that are obviously the closest to us, with chimps and bonobos being by far the most closely related to humans, they're different social organizations. Orangutans are dispersed. They don't live in social groups at all. So that there's no politics or power sharing involved there. Gorillas are alpha male, one adult male, a bunch of females and young. Other adult males are kicked out of the group. So it's not much of a hierarchy there. There's just one male. It's, like a harem situation. And then you have the chimps and bonobos who do have hierarchies. They're status hierarchies, though. They're not related to resource distribution, especially in chimps, not at all, where chimps are more sort of like hunter-gatherers in the sense that they share resources. Chimps, on the other hand, are male-dominated and the alpha males, the top echelon of males, will take most of the resources. So if you take, for example, a collection of chimps in a cage and you throw in a bucket of food or something, the dominant males will take over the food and they'll share it amongst themselves. And maybe if a female is ovulating and available for sex, they might give her some as well, right? Whereas if you take the same bucket of food and throw it into an enclosure of bonobos, they'll feel that same stress, like, uh-oh, what are we going to do now? And the way bonobos deal with stress is they have sex. So they'll all have sex with each other, and then they'll share the food. Totally different approach.
I would say so. Okay. Well, you also so I don't know how to say this without sounding ridiculous, but people make a big deal um out of life and death. I know that sounds funny because that's the biggest thing, right? But you tell the story about the harbor seals, or you make the point about which I think is a great point that people miss. So go ahead and make that point.
Well, I was watching one of those BBC specials, right? One of those documentaries with Sir Richard Attenborough, which I love. I mean, that's the best, my favorite thing to watch. And there was I was working on the book at the time, and so I was noticing, where the narrative crops up in popular culture. And they were showing harbor seals playing in the waves. I think they were in South Africa. And there's sort of happy music, and the harbor seals are frolicking, and then you hear the do, right? And then you see a shadow coming up in the wave. And I don't remember if it was a great white shark or an orca, but it came up and it hit the seal, and the seal went up in the air, and you see this monster coming out of the water with his teeth bared, and then the seal falls and it bites it, and there's blood running down. It's just totally horrible. And the narrator says, we've slowed this down to 1/40th of normal speed so you can, appreciate the horror and the terror. And, he's going on about how nature is red in tooth and claw and this constant battle for survival and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, like, wait a minute now. This is exactly the narrative that I'm arguing against in this book. And so I looked up harbor seals on, Wikipedia or wherever it was. And harbor seals live an average, I think it was 25 or 30 years. And I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute. So this seal lived, let's say he's not even old. Let's say he's 20 years, lying around on warm rocks, frolicking with his friends, eating sushi, just totally chilling out. And then when the end comes, it comes so quickly that you need to slow it down to 1/40th of normal speed to even see it. And at the time, my father was in the hospital dying, and he'd been in and out of hospitals for 5 or 6 years, getting every damn test that, because he had good insurance. So they were sending him in for this and that and the other thing. And I'm thinking, man, that seal had it way better than my dad, right? I wish my dad's death had to be slowed down to 1/40th of normal speed so you could even see it. And, so I think that's the kind of thing that we're not thinking clearly about, right? We're all going to die. And part of that slavery mentality that you and I were talking about earlier is ignoring the future, right? Ignoring death, either because you're going to go to heaven and that's where you're finally going to get paid for all this work and suffering you've done, or just pretend you're never going to die, which we're encouraged to do, because then you're more likely to sacrifice the present. Which is all we have ultimately. But this dying quickly is a blessing. We're all going to die. So why not die quickly? Hunter-gatherers tend to die quickly. They have active, vigorous, healthy lives, and then they die in a matter of days. And often they commit suicide when a man particularly feels like he's at the end of his days, he can't help anymore, he can't keep up, he'll wander off and end his life intentionally and by himself. And we might look at that and say, oh, that's terrible, how tragic. But man, if you spent time in hospitals, you know that there are much more tragic ways to go.
Did hunter-gatherers have religion?
Hunter-gatherer religions tend to be animistic. meaning that they believe that spirits live everywhere in the world. They're spirits of wind and water and rivers and plants and all that. So everything is imbued with spirit. Often there's ancestor worship is involved in hunter-gatherer religions, and they're pantheistic. So whatever gods or important spirits they have, there are many of them. They don't have this one. See, we see that hierarchy reflected in monotheistic religions as well. One king, one god, one father.
Well, monotheism was, again, that's another case where progress is not always good, because monotheism is the responsible for lots of deaths, lots of wars, lots of deaths. Look at the Middle East. Everybody's God is better than someone else's God. But if you're a hunter-gatherer, everybody's God is the wind god and the sun god and the earth god. There's no ownership of a god. The gods were everywhere. So that's as we moved forward, we became monotheistic, and that was definitely to the detriment of human beings. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, of course. And you mentioned this earlier, the gratitude you mentioned. There's mobility, egalitarianism, and gratitude are sort of the three pillars of hunter-gatherer societies. The gratitude comes from the fact that hunter-gatherers, the great irony of hunter-gatherers is that they have nothing. We look at them and we would say, well, they have nothing. They have no material possessions. They just have whatever they carry with them and that they happen to find, right? But they act as if they have everything. They act as if they're incredibly wealthy. They don't worry about the future. They're not gathering things for the winter to get them through. They trust that the world will give them what they need. And I quote various missionaries and explorers and people who had these confused exchanges with native people where they're having a feast and the missionary says, well, wait, why aren't you saving some of this for tomorrow? And the Indian's like, well, we'll just find some more tomorrow. Like, what's your problem, dude? Have a good time, So they have this very relaxed approach to life because they live in a world that provides what they need. It's as if you and I had a limitless credit card that we never had to pay, right? It's like, hey, the world's full of stuff. All I do is show this card. I get it. Whereas we, who apparently have so much, live in a world of plenitude, have created a sense of scarcity. So we're constantly afraid about losing what we have, constantly trying to get more, constantly stressed out, whether we're talking about our sex lives or our houses or our cars. Like, it's always about to be lost. You always have to get more and prepare for some terrible future that never seems to come. So the gratitude is in response to a world that provides what's needed. And when you look at the spirits and the gods of hunter-gatherers, they're nurturing. It's Mother Earth. It's a nurturing, loving presence in their lives. And then you go to monotheistic religions and you get these angry, fickle, jealous, freaky God of the Old Testament.
Yeah, very much so. Well, listen, it's a great book. It's a fascinating read. Civilized to Death by Christopher Ryan. He's also the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Sex at Dawn. This is his second book, and it's gotten great reviews. I can tell you I'm loving it already. It's eye-opening, and it actually it's like a book for our time, I think, right? Because people really don't know how to live right now. That's why, suicides are going up, antidepressants, everybody's on them, even toddlers. They're giving antidepressants to everybody. They got antidepressants for your pets. They got them. So it's like, rethinking how you live and why you feel the way you feel. It's because we weren't made to live in a world like this. Well, listen, anything else you want to say before we say goodbye? Hey, you have a podcast too. Everybody should check that out. Where can they find it?
They can find all of it on my website, thatchrisryan.com.
Okay.
The podcast I've got, I'm about to post episode 400. So I've been doing it for a while.
Wow, look at that. Okay, I got tired of doing my podcast after 173 episodes. That was it for me.
Come on, Jimmy. I'd love to have you on mine, huh?
Oh, okay, sure. I would love to do that. That would be great. All right, Christopher Ryan, new book, Civilized to Death. God damn, that's how I feel. Decision. You know what? Did you ever hear this, Chris? There's this story Alan Watts tells. This guy he has a ranch. He hires this guy. Stop me if you've heard it. He hires this guy to come work for him. He says, "Hey, could you go mend the fences?" He figures that'll take him a week or two. He does it in one day. Like, holy shit. So the next day he says, "Hey, could you pick up all the fallen lumber branches and cut it up for firewood?" He does. Boom, he's got it done with his. I did it. It's like, oh my God, you're the best worker I ever had. So he takes him down the cellar. He says, "Hey, look at all the potatoes. I need you to take the potatoes, decide which ones we're going to keep, which ones we're going to use for fertilizer, and which ones we're going to throw away." So at the end of the day, the guy comes, he goes, "All right, that's it. I quit." He goes, "What are you talking? Why you quit? You're the best employee I ever had in my life. What's the matter? I'll pay you double." He goes, "I don't care." He goes, "Fixing the fences is one thing, picking up lumber is another. But this potato business, it's decision after decision after decision." And when I heard that, I was like, holy shit, that's what I feel like. It's like, I just wish I could go back to being a bricklayer, because when I was done laying bricks, I was fucking done. I didn't think about it. I went out and I played basketball or softball, and I drank a pitcher of beer, and I was the happiest guy in the world. And now I'm just thinking, I'm not laying bricks. I'm in an air-conditioned office, and I am miserable.
Yeah, I tell this story in the book about this BBC dude who was in New Guinea, living with some Stone Age people, essentially, in New Guinea, and doing a movie about them. And at one point, a couple of the guys said, "Hey, man, you've been here with us. You see how we live. Can we come visit you in your world?" And when he got back to London, he talked to his bosses at the BBC and proposed it. And they were like, "Wow, that's a great idea. What an amazing, documentary that would be." So his first concern was that they would come to London and never want to leave because they'd see all this great stuff, So he went and he talked to a couple of anthropologists, and they assured him, "Don't worry about that. That's not going to happen." So they flew these two dudes out, right? They got them from their village, got them to London, and they spent, I think, about a month in London. And there's this amazing scene he talks about where they're having breakfast. They're living at the house of one of the producers. And they're having breakfast one morning, and the guy, the owner of the house, is about to leave. He's got to go to work, and they say, "Hey, why do you always leave so early? Like, you're gone before the sun comes up, and you come back when the sun's down, and like you're not spending time with the people you love." And the guy says, "Well, I have to work, Like, "Oh, work, really? Why do you have to work?" And he said, "Well, so I could like pay for this house, for example." And they say, "Yeah, how many days do you have to work to pay for your house?" He said, 30 years. And they're like, "What? Are you kidding?" They said, "I want a house. My friends come over. We work a couple of days. I have a house. Like, what are you doing?" And anyway, so at the end of their visit to England, there was only one thing that they took back with them to Papua New Guinea, one idea that they were really impressed by, which was the idea of putting feathers on arrows so they'd fly straighter.
Yeah. That's progress, baby.
There it is. There it is.
All right. That's a great story. Great way to end the podcast. Hey, thanks for talking with us, Chris Ryan. Civilized to Death is the book. Check it out, and check out his podcast, all at his website. All right, buddy. Talk to you soon. Take care.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy. This was great.
All right. Bye-bye. Come see our live show. We're going to be in Honolulu on December 27th. We'll be in Portland, Oregon, and then we go to Tempe, Arizona, San Jose, California, Sacramento, Miami. Go to JimmyDoreComedy.com for a link for all the tickets for all our live shows coming to a town near you, and become a patron or support the Jimmy Dore Show. We give you hours of bonus material every week. Go to JimmyDoreComedy.com, become a premium member. Thanks for your support.